Hello and welcome to the All Things Social Impact podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Kanaris, and today we are joined by my friend and my ex-colleague, Amanda Micallef. Amanda, welcome to All Things Social Impact, and thank you for joining us today. Would you like to, for our listeners, for our watchers, introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for having me today, Andrea. So my background is largely in social impact assessment specifically. So as you would know, but maybe not everybody, I started my professional career with yourself in consulting, predominantly within the extractives and renewables space. I've also had experience in local government as well, and I'm currently back in the private sector working as a senior consultant as part of a social planning team.
Fantastic. Yes, we did start off together, didn't we? It was
Yeah.
just you and I when we first started at the EnviroFam, and we built it into something that I think we're both proud of, but we both moved on from there since then. If For the viewers, I think it's really nice if you define social impact up front. When you say social impact and when you think about social impact, what does it actually mean for you? Because I do believe there's a lot of different interpretations of what it means. So this will help frame it so when our listeners know that we're talking about social impact, that we're coming from a particular perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, social impact means, as you said, quite there. It means quite a few things. There are quite a few disciplines under social impact specifically. The space that I predominantly work in is under the planning system. Currently, that's largely within New South Wales, a little bit of Queensland, a little bit of Victoria, but it's generally to contribute to either the approval or the modification of development of some kind. And in terms of social impact, particularly conducting social impact assessment, usually to accompany a development application at some level, but understanding how a project or a changing environment will affect the people within it or people around it or other people who engage with those environments in some way.
Yeah. And I think you and I would probably come, at least in some part, a lot of the way of sharing that kind of experience of applying social impact in that particular planning context. So here's an interesting question for
Hmm.
your journey into social impact. So how did you find yourself attracted to, and how did you pursue, what drove you, I guess, to pursue, what drives you to pursue social impact?
Yeah, well, I guess my introduction to it wasn't necessarily intentional. I took during my master's at UQ, I took a social impact assessment class as part of my Master of Development practice, and I hadn't heard of it previously. I honestly didn't know what planning was until that point either. But what was really, I guess, engaging about that class in particular is that there was a really interesting kind of applied component to it, conducting our own social impact assessment. But we also had several guest lecturers throughout the second half of that course to kind of introduce the different facets of social impact assessment, what it looks like in different countries or in different applications, for example, like through the Office of the Coordinator General in Queensland or a more academic sense. But I think so through that, I found my graduate position with yourself at an engineering firm. And I think what has kind of kept me within the realm of social impact assessment and I guess social value and social planning more broadly is not only like the diversity of projects, but also the diversity of locations and people that you get to work with and um, I guess that you get to become familiar with and that you get to learn about. So it's it can be quite exciting, I suppose, just because you're never doing the same thing twice.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because on the surface it might look like you're applying the same methodologies or you're applying the same kind of techniques and stuff like that. But every project is really different. Every location really has
Mhm.
its own challenges, locations, but also then the projects have also their own challenges. And that combination is never really quite the same. Where it's really
No,
different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, like the methodology that we use, it's going to be consistent, I guess is the best word that I would say. It's not going to be the same necessarily, but there's going to be a certain framework that we use, often because it is guided. Well, for social impact assessment, at least guided by a guideline. We've got to demonstrate the rigor in accordance with that. But yeah, the nature of impacts just differs greatly, I find, across even two different projects within the same area.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I
Yeah.
do, yeah.
No, that resonates with me. I've found it quite interesting that sometimes also the things that on the surface might look like it's going to be a really, this all seems straightforward, the project doesn't seem too tricky. But when you actually dig in, quite often it can be quite surprising. Projects that you don't expect to be complex can be quite complex when you start looking into the community's concerns and issues and getting really underneath what the kind of impacts might be. And yeah, I share that. I share that love of the challenge because it's diverse and it's interesting all the time. So, from your personal perspective, what do you personally get out of doing that community social impact kind of work? Is it values driven? Is it a rewarding kind of experience? What kind of thing drives you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess that there would be a few things. I think first it's getting to, it is really getting the opportunity to work in a social science based profession. Yeah, I think from the time I studied and then started in the workforce, I wasn't exactly sure where like social science takes you since it's so interdisciplinary. There are so many different avenues, but getting the opportunity to actually like conduct research and to analyze that research and to have everything kind of available in terms of like social science research
Yeah,
methodologies and those kind of ways that you think about social research
yeah,
and getting to investigate and explore those kind of continuously. I find it really quite engaging, I suppose, and interesting and fascinating. So I guess there's one component of kind of just building up and continuing on to build kind of technical knowledge. It's ongoing learning, which is really very enjoyable.
yeah,
And then there is absolutely another side, which is, working in a space where really what you're trying to do is just create the best outcomes for the community or for
yeah,
stakeholders or whoever is involved, including proponents and clients. So it's all about trying to maximize those benefits and minimize potential harms or potential negative impacts. So
yeah.
it's great being able to be in a space and work in a space where you can have some really direct recommendations or some direct involvement in improving, hopefully, circumstances for people and communities.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really lovely reason to get up in the day and start your day
Yeah.
doing something that contributes to other people's well-being and takes you outside of yourself. And the fact that you've got the value side of it, of helping other people, but also the fact that there's this, I continue to learn and grow and
Mhm.
do the kind of work that I went to obviously went to uni because you were interested in social sciences, and being in a job where you can actually do that and continue to learn is, I love
Yeah.
that combination. That's a really nice combination. So when you think of the projects that you've worked on, and for our viewers and listeners out there, when you on that journey, what were your challenges or barriers that you found? Like, what was the hardest thing for you in terms of transitioning from that university theoretical framework into, okay, now I've got to apply this in real world, real jobs. I'm actually talking to people about their real impacts here. What were the challenges that you,
Yeah.
career-wise and personally, in that?
Yeah, there have definitely been a few challenges, a few learning curves. Um, I suppose one of the things that like I think I had to learn really quite quickly is to be careful about assumptions that I'm making. So even though I might feel like I have an understanding of what, somebody's circumstances might be, obviously this is where community engagement and consultation is absolutely critical.
Yeah,
So listening to the community, but then also in terms of assumptions, being careful to remain impartial and not necessarily being collecting enough data and I guess triangulating effectively enough that we're not just being influenced probably by certain stakeholders or certain community members who may be a little bit more prominent in the discussion.
Yeah.
So I think really being quite purposeful and quite careful and intentional about taking a step back and looking at all of the evidence, all of the data to create that actual picture of what is happening.
That's not a small one either, Amanda. That's a big
Well,
one
that's hard.
because
Yeah.
so personal. It's so personal for the community and for the
Yeah.
people you're talking to. And when we say community, there's communities within communities, as you pointed out. There's subsets of communities, and some do have louder voices, and some can. It can be quite emotive in the moment,
Yeah.
and it's actually not that easy. It sounds like to step back sometimes and stay objective. And so what do you find works for you in terms of being able to do that? Like, do you have a ritual that you've adopted, a kind of little approach that you've learnt, a technique that you've learnt that you could share with people to say, look, here's something that works for me?
I mean, I think probably in the first instance, just when, in particular, when speaking like with community, it's a lot of the time you're just wanting to listen for as long as you need to listen. And as you said, incredibly understandably so as well. These are They're potentially big changes that are affecting people's real lives, and you don't want to, I guess, discount that or not take into consideration the potential, I don't know, gravity or significance of the situation. But often I do find that people want to be just listened to a lot of the time. So once they have a chance to kind of like have that initial kind
Mm.
of unloading, we'll call it maybe, or just that initial concerns that they're raising. After that, just taking the time to let them kind of go through that as they need to. And then after that, you can kind of get more into the discussion and really get to, why they have these concerns and what really is it about this change or this project. Because sometimes it's not necessarily what they perhaps were originally thinking it would be, but you get to underlying kind of challenges.
Yeah,
So,
that
yeah.
certainly tracks with my experience as well, Amanda. I know I quite often say that I have to give up. A lot of the time, it's like you're giving them just a platform to air their grievances, their concerns, their issues, have a vent, however you want to put it. But it's really actively listening to them and allowing them that space to tell you. Because I find that quite often you don't get to the kind of really nitty gritty of what's underneath all of that until you allow them to do that and show them that you're actually listening. Because it's not just
Yeah.
doing it, isn't it? Letting them know that you've actually heard what they were saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the important part as well. Like, that's what we want to know. These are, yeah, the people who are going to be experiencing those changes. And,
Mm,
if we don't listen to them, how are we meant to consider their potential experiences in it? Yeah.
yeah. And that's particularly challenging because I don't know, I'm sure, you and I have both worked in that, you both work in that consulting space, and time constraints can make that the ability to do that effectively hard. But I don't know, do you have techniques that you use, or what do you do when you find yourself in a situation where it's important to do that? How do you build rigor into this process to make sure that your stakeholders are heard when you've got a really tight budget or time frame? And it's,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the reality sometimes that we have to work in. But I'm a believer that you don't have to, give up rigor. So
No,
what's
no.
forced what are some of the things that you do to try and instill rigor when you're in that scenario?
Yeah, it's challenging. I guess the first thing, I guess, in particular, I guess, relate to both time and budget,
Mm,
um, is I guess, being very strategic or careful about which stakeholders you are speaking to. So, for example, I am maybe speaking, really prioritizing services who have those experiences with the community and can kind of speak to them as a kind of a representative of sorts. Or if there are other rep, yeah, community organizations, finding, I guess, those stakeholders who have a good understanding of the community or other stakeholder groups who can comfortably speak to them or
yeah,
speak on behalf of them. And that's kind of, I guess, how you can have those more kind of semi-structured, in detail discussions by being very purposeful about the
Yeah, I
stakeholders.
think that's a really good point. I know that we've been in some of those smaller towns, country towns, and it's a really great strategy. I like the way you say, pick those service providers, the people with their, I guess I would use the term finger on the pulse sort of thing of
Mhm.
their community. What I like about them, particularly service providers, is that they wear multiple hats because they're not just the service provider. They're a mum, or they're a or they're
Yeah.
an uncle, or they're a father, or they're also a member of a community group, and they're also, I don't know, looking after an elderly. So they've got a kind of rounded perspective, and they usually know their
Yeah.
community quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. They're often a part of the community themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
So it can be really helpful. And then I think the other thing is also just applying some kind of, mixed methods in terms of consultation in particular. So,
mm,
having those in-depth interviews with council officers usually,
yeah,
first representatives, etc. And then having maybe some more accessible or easier to use consultation methods available to kind of support that as well, whether it's surveying or workshops or something else where you can have a
yeah,
larger scale format
yeah,
in terms of participation to kind
yeah,
of supplement as well. And then you can use all of the sources to kind of cross analyze and
yeah,
get the full
yeah.
picture.
Because I think that's a challenge that I think most people will come across in the social impact space is that time and budget. It's great when you get the project that does have a budget that allows you to do the more complex kind of, data collection and community engagement, and really dig in and do detailed assessment in that way. But that's not all projects, unfortunately.
No,
And
no.
that's it. So, I mean, it's always nice to talk about, I guess, the challenges, but there's also, I'm sure you've had some experiences where you're going like, this is what I have. What was the project that you have probably enjoyed the most, learnt the most from, and really kind of, I guess, put it down as one of your favorite experiences in terms of delivering social impact work?
Yeah, probably one of the most impactful projects that I've worked for, and it's kind of still ongoing, but it was to support a case in the Land and Environment Court of New South Wales.
Yeah.
So this one was really interesting. I don't know how much I can go into it, but basically it
You're
was
talking very broad.
very broadly. Yeah. So it was interesting because it was a social impact specifically to act as evidence in Land and Environment Court.
Yeah.
And in particular, it was to, I guess, protect a group of very vulnerable people.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, it was a really, really good project in that it was incredibly thorough, very, very specific, and has potential for, a real direct outcome for it.
Yeah. It's nice when you can have that level of direct link between the work you're doing and the outcome for the community that you've been working with.
Yeah.
But what I think you picked up on there, like you made the work vulnerable, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there something about the fact that there's vulnerable groups? Because I often think, I don't know what your thoughts are, so I'm just going to throw it out there. To me, the whole point of social impact is the vulnerable. In particular, like, I mean, yes, there are people impacted, but there's a degree of people who will roll with the change. So they might feel impacts at the beginning, they might feel it, but they will adjust, adapt. They've got the ability and the capability to adjust. But
Yeah.
then you've got these vulnerable people. Those vulnerable people just don't have that necessary ability to adjust in the same way.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense that vulnerable people or vulnerable groups in particular would be a focus area of social impact
Yeah.
assessment because, as you said, it's about adjusting and it's about adaptation. And I guess in social impact assessment, at the basis of this is ultimately looking how change affects people
Yeah.
and, you know, any kind of change, how can those people respond and react and how can they accommodate it? So for somebody who does not have those necessary supports to be able to continue to thrive or even just continue to exist in the way that they were previously,
Yeah.
important to understand how those decisions that we're making will affect them in those changes
Yeah,
and what can be done.
and that's that survive versus thrive. I mean, ideally, what you want to do is a project takes those vulnerable people and doesn't just leave them at the survival end, but actually can bring them on the journey where they can shift beyond the surviving and into the thriving where possible, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Vulnerable is an interesting one to me because I think it's really easy to fall into the lazy space with vulnerable. And what I mean by that, and I'm happy for you to push back on this, but I quite often think that vulnerable, it's easy to go to a group of people like disabled, youth, women, and assume that they're vulnerable. And this might lean into some of the comment you made about assumptions in the first instance. But there are sometimes people who, on the surface, you may not think are vulnerable, but because of the situation and the project, there may be something in that unique environment that takes them from being stable to vulnerable very quickly. And if we're not careful, we can miss those people and not recognize that, in fact, just because on the surface they look to be hunky-dory and doing well before the project, that if you're not careful to really to put a lens on how it may affect some of these people, and if you don't understand what are the mechanisms that lead someone to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
you don't know what data to be looking at and what factors to be looking at or what kinds of things to be keeping an eye out to
Yeah.
flag with you that someone might be vulnerable.
I
Have
know,
you
absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. I think like maybe a good example of, being careful about potential changes, increasing vulnerability, like, livelihood and the way that people work is
Yeah.
a really big example of that, particularly in like the renewable space. But yeah, so if you're changing one aspect about the way that somebody can sustain themselves, they're no longer able to do that, then they kind of, that
Yeah.
triggers transition into becoming more vulnerable or vulnerability. So it's
Yeah.
understanding what are those elements that people currently have or need in order to continue to sustain themselves or improve their situation. If you're taking something away or you're changing something,
Yeah.
it have an effect.
The example I can think of, and I was looking at a project recently. Again, this is so I can't go into too much detail because it was another like court one. But when you look at the properties neighbouring, say, a project, if you've gone from not having a project that has a construction or whatever in it, and then one that doesn't, you can't buy yourself out of the scenario. It's very hard to sell a property to somebody. So that's one layer of it. And this is the thing with social impact, it's layers. You might go, oh, well, the construction will pass, but what if that person has a respiratory condition, is particularly vulnerable to dust? They can't just necessarily,
Yeah.
you might go, they own their house, and you're like, well, can't they sell and move? It's like, it's not that easy to sell a house that's right next to a construction site. It actually makes it increasingly difficult. There'd probably be easier for them to sell it after the construction's finished, but not prior. And, it's like these people quite often can't buy themselves out of the problem that they find themselves in. And prior to there being a project next door, yes, they already had the respiratory condition, but they weren't having to suffer with a construction site seeing dust on a daily basis. So there are, I think, a perfect example of someone who normally you wouldn't consider vulnerable. But if you're not looking for those factors, if you're just doing the categories of, are they
Mm,
indigenous, are they women, are they youth, are they currently homeless? I mean, which are very valid, of course, but
yeah.
they're not the only ones, and it's really easy to miss someone. And
Yeah.
even knowing things like the rate at which, like the stages to go from having a home to being homeless is really rapid. Like, yeah, really rapid. It
Oh,
can happen really quickly. Like, I was just thinking about your livelihood example. Like, that's a pathway that actually can become very rapid if someone's
yeah. Well, I think, a group of people who are becoming increasingly vulnerable or in more vulnerable circumstances that we're seeing very regularly are key and essential workers. Yeah, nurses, teachers,
Yeah,
the rates at which they're rising in terms of homelessness, not necessarily, rough sleepers. but in other kinds of homelessness where they don't have a permanent place and a secure place to live.
The couch surfing kind of arrangement.
Exactly. Yeah, couch surfing or temporary
Living
housing.
class is unfortunately quite on the rise as well,
Yeah.
which is, and this is a good segue because you saying that reminded me that you worked a lot with youth. So let's just, most of the conversation has been around, applying social impact in that consulting, I think, but you've also worked in council, where
Yeah.
social impact is kind of a little bit different, isn't it? It's a different perspective. So how did you find that? There's two very contrasting, very different environments in which to work in the social impact space.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. I think so with my role in council, kind of had two roles there. One as a social planner, so still kind of in that strategic planning development space,
Yeah.
but then also as the youth development officer for a little while. So that was working directly with youth service providers and organizations, as well as to deliver programming for young people. That one was really interesting. And I think what I've learned about my role in there is really the importance, I guess, of partnerships, not just with like myself as council representative and one organization or service provider,
Yeah.
but the importance of that kind of, I guess, cross communication and collaboration within the whole sector.
Yes.
So, for example, we had we had there, and I do believe it still exists, it's the Tweedshire Youth Network, which is essentially like a recurring kind of monthly meeting for relevant representatives within the youth space within the Tweed. So that was an opportunity for different stakeholders or representatives to engage, discuss,
Yeah.
and then actually create actions in terms of what different people were able to do to support intentions or actions for others. So we had representatives from different schools, representatives from the social support sector, mental health sector, New South Wales Health as well. So just a wide range of
Yeah.
people to
That's
who,
really different
yeah,
kind of work, isn't it, Amanda? Because what you're describing there is a really hands-on. It's still social impact, like having an impact on
yeah,
in a particular community, but it's a lot more hands-on, isn't it? Councils tend to be very closer to the ground.
yes, there was a lot more, I guess, working directly with either service providers or community representatives, community members,
Yeah.
or a lot more working closely with potential like developers as well for like
Yes.
new communities, new estates, things like that.
Yeah. And so for people who perhaps have worked in consulting but not necessarily, say, in council,
Yes.
I've worked in state government. I haven't actually worked for a council. You know, when you're obviously consulting, we're dealing with the developer in the most instance, interacting with them. We do interact with obviously the regulators as well, but from a very different perspective. So when you're in council and you're the social planner, and how does that play out in social impact? And how does that play out in terms of the relationship with the developer? What is your role? And what did you experience? Because Tweed's a really interesting one, because when you were there would have been the introduction of the energy zones, there would have been the housing crisis emerging. So it would have been rather an interesting time.
Yeah,
We've observed quite a lot of interesting
it
things
was.
happening. Yeah.
First and foremost, though, my like proper introduction into working like full time in the Tweed was about a week after the 2022 floods happened in the Northern
Yes,
River.
that's right.
Yeah, so it was so my role was within the community development team specifically. So my, I guess, kind of introduction for a real, properly into working with council was that flood response.
Mhm.
And in particular, our team largely supported vulnerable people. So a lot of the like caravan parks with residents who don't necessarily have anywhere else to live. And then, yeah, moving on from that, it was kind of an interesting experience just because there was so much need, obviously, for the response and then ongoing recovery afterwards. What I found was my role specifically wasn't necessarily what I thought it was going to be, but it was a lot of supporting other areas of my team and council where others were necessarily having to focus on those direct responses and recovery. But I think, yeah, what it meant is I got to experience a lot of different kind of roles and jobs within council. Yeah. But in terms of social impact, in terms of the social planning role, rather, it was kind of an interesting time at council. When I was working there, they were updating their development control plan. So it was an opportunity to kind of, with that, update their own social impact assessment policy and guideline for projects that they actually require social impact assessment from.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting. There was a lot of movement, I think, with it. And then there's also an opportunity for several new communities that are being built within the Tweed. So part of my role as a social planner as well was to, I guess, contribute to those discussions about what do some of these aspects of the communities need to look like. For example, provision of community facilities.
Yeah.
What actually needs to be provided to support these communities.
Because there's no shortage, is there, of developments that that provide the housing, but not the infrastructure around it. But there might be roads in and out, but not necessarily trains or not necessarily buses. Or hopefully that's changing. We're seeing hopefully a lot more of mixed developments, which is great. But there have been historically a lot of these housing estates that don't necessarily have the infrastructure.
No, and you, I mean, even outside of council, like in consulting, there have been projects where I've been, for example, I guess I was doing social impact assessment for a new primary school in Western Sydney, and most of the housing was already built, but every person I spoke to was like, we were told that there would be schools and there would be parks and there would be community infrastructure here to support us. However, all we have is homes and like no green space and nothing. No community hubs. So it really, really demonstrates the importance of providing those communities holistically.
Yeah. Well, I know what you're down the coast, aren't you? And I'm Brisbane, and in Queensland, we know there are lots of these satellite kind of developments that maybe eventually the infrastructure catches on. But a lot of the time you get people who move out there and they're reliant on cars, have to drive everywhere because there isn't any real infrastructure particularly.
Yeah, exactly. And there's one of the projects I'm working at the moment, which is actually quite exciting as well. It is a social housing estate renewal in New South Wales. So it's kind of coming to the end of life. It's a large one as well. It's 50 hectares, but it's understanding, if when we update this housing, it's a mix of social and affordable housing as well as private housing. But what do those community facilities, what does the social infrastructure need to look like to actually, support these groups of people? In particular, understanding that there is going to be a more vulnerable cohort of people there as well in, social and affordable housing tenants.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at that broader social planning as opposed to social impact assessment, how are you doing that? Like, so how are you determining, like, are you still using the community engagement? Are you still using the social? Is it the same skill set applied differently? How are you determining what that social infrastructure looks like? I mean, I'm sure you're not sitting there just, with your little calculator deciding in your desk.
No.
How many of X, Y, and Z is required for this particular community?
Yeah,
exactly. You may not have done this before. How would you do that social infrastructure piece of work?
Absolutely. So it's a very similar skill set to social impact assessment with just a few differences. I mean, in terms of, the social baselining at the start, understanding what these communities currently look like, and then doing future profiling as well. So what does the incoming community, what do we think they might look like? So kind of understanding that baseline, as well as the kind of strategic government direction within that area. So the policy review, what do the council documents say about this community? Because councils they know their community really well. So what do they say they need? As well as the state. And then absolutely in this case, I'm doing some relatively extensive stakeholder engagement particularly in the form of engaging with kind of key representatives,
Yeah.
whether they're service providers, some government departments, council.
Mm.
So different, I guess, experts in different kind of in different areas of infrastructure. So, for example, speaking with people within health,
Yeah.
speaking with people within schools, speaking with people in recreation and open space, community facilities, libraries, kind of the whole range of stakeholders. And then also using some supplementary community engagement data as well. And then in terms of, how to actually determine it, that is using the evidence of what we've heard and then also applying some kind of benchmarks in terms of the different infrastructure types. Usually we use best practice unless there is a specific benchmark that council has usually set, because that is the kind of challenging thing about like social infrastructure assessment. There's no statewide set benchmarks. Some councils have them, some don't, but they're all generally different.
Yeah, and it's that's true. Benchmarkings are always tricky, and then it's also which services are provided state level, but need to be provided locally, but are run by, and the infrastructure and the funding comes from a state or federal level.
Yeah,
it's not as simple as just dealing with council, is it? It's like the layers of government kind of make as well.
Absolutely. And and then also bringing in the kind of perspectives of those stakeholders as well. Like, for example, I think we were talking about like a PCYC or something like that. And we saw there was one in like a nearby suburb. And, looking at that, we were like, that's not too far. Like, surely that would be adequate. But then talking to them, they're like, it's actually really challenging for kids to get to that one. And we'd really, really benefit from having one directly within this community.
Yeah.
So that's some piece of information that's really important.
And that feeds into your assumption thing, isn't it? You go in with a thought. You have to put that thought aside and allow them to tell you whether that's actually right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What I really love about the social infrastructure stuff too, in what you were describing, is that you're really into that collaborative design. It's really where social impact meets design.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, it should be happening like nice and early. I know sometimes it happens retrospectively, but ideally, you're in the design phase where you're actually being able to create a community outcome, which is really lovely. We don't always necessarily in social impact get to do that, but I think the social infrastructure space is one where you get to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. It is nice having kind of that direct contribution as well prior to the project taking off, or prior to it going through the approvals process.
Yeah.
Even so, designing, from the outset, hopefully meeting those needs of that future population.
Yeah. So do you have a preferred area of social impact that you like to work on, or do you just like the diversity?
Yeah, I like the diversity.
I kind of knew you were going to say that when I asked it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just, as I said before, I like new learning experiences. It keeps things really exciting. I know it keeps myself engaged. So it's a little selfish in that sense.
But isn't that important in your career to enjoy your work, which means there has to be the two sides. And I thought you articulated it beautifully. There's a self side of it in terms of I enjoy the learning, I enjoy the challenges, etc. But there's also the value side of I get to help other people. And I think both of those are really important. So because I know I worked for you, we can be quite frank. When you come into a career, and what were the things that I suppose, because as you know, we had an early careers series before we kicked off into the professionals category. And when we were working together, you also assisted a lot in the kind of mentoring them and helping them get a leg up as they transitioned into it. However, it was just you and I when you came in. So what were your challenges? What are the things that would have helped you very early? You can tell me because and tell me, you could have done this for me, Andrea. It would have been really helpful. No, but I think that's intrinsic, like that transition from university into the workplace can be challenging. So what do you find challenging, and what if you ideally could go back and say, if I'd have had this, it would have made just that transition that little bit easier, less challenging?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think this is probably honestly the most challenging aspect was just the fact that I guess going into the business that we were both
Yeah,
in, and trying to establish a team and get kind of internal
yeah,
buy-in from the rest of the organization. I think that having to almost kind of feel like you're having to prove why your discipline is relevant and is necessary was a big challenge in coming into a new position, but then also coming into a new team in a business
yeah,
is essentially, but yeah, which is it's tricky when you don't necessarily have the support
yeah.
from
That's
the rest of the
that's
business.
really that's really true. And as you know, I think we both felt that at the time, and I think that would resonate with a lot of people listening who work in either an environmental firm or a engineering firm, and not because there's anything wrong with engineering firms or environmental firms. It's the fact that they speak a different language and they don't fully understand what we do, and it is exhausting, at least to constantly having to explain, why you exist and why you're there and why.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate as well that it is largely due to a changing legislative context
Yeah,
as well. I mean, previously, there wasn't as much requirement in terms of social impact assessment in the kind of planning space specifically,
yeah,
where clients and firms were previously able to kind of conduct this work without this specific
mm.
discipline. It makes sense that it would be a challenge once they're told, actually.
And we definitely were establishing that team in the backdrop
Mhm.
and in the context of the introduction of an increased rigor
Yeah,
with the guidelines, both in New South Wales and in Queensland. So we were
yeah,
definitely in that environment, which did add a layer. So the expectations of what was acceptable were
yeah,
changing rapidly at that time. I think we were a bit further down the line now, although we're seeing it with some of the renewables in Queensland with the new requirements for wind farms, for example. So we're going to see another
yeah,
industry in Queensland having to adjust to that. Some of them would be familiar with New South Wales and may have some exposure. There's maybe not so much. But yes, we were definitely looking at it in that it was a point in time that we were doing something, I think, difficult, but in a
mm,
context that was also difficult. I think we did well though.
I reckon we did, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so.
And
Yeah, but, I think I mean, that is
rewarding
obviously
because we built
yeah,
something which was really nice, and it
absolutely
was
agree.
it was a good company to work for as well. Like we have,
Mhm.
it wasn't all no support. We'd had supporters. It was just challenging, wasn't it? Because it was constantly reminding them the why all the time.
Yeah, but I think, that's obviously a circumstance that I hope is becoming a little bit less and less maybe a little bit less and less common. I mean, it's something that I think is still widely experienced.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the changes, I can see definite changes and definitely progress in the social impact space, but I would by no means say that we are ideally in a place where we can go, we don't need to explain to everybody why we exist and why you need to do it. I don't think we're there yet. I think there are different industries at different speeds with it. And I
Yeah.
think there are some industries that are really premature, but they've definitely got training wheels on. And then you've got ones that are a bit more sophisticated. And even within those sophisticated industries in the social impact or the corporate social responsibility, which I would
Yeah.
different, but the ESG space and the S in ESG, there are there are a range of understanding.
Yeah.
Like it's not like the whole industry gets it. I think there are parts of the industry that really get it, and there are actors within the industry that probably still don't really sold on the S in ESG yet. So
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think the mining sector is a really good
The perfect example,
example
and
of
that's
that.
probably what I was thinking of when I was saying that it's a mixed bag. There are some
Yeah,
exceptional actors who really are keen to do the right thing, who really want to do not just good practice, but they want to be leaders in it. They want to demonstrate that they do it. And there's others, well, it's like pulling teeth. We've we've had our share of both, haven't we? So, but what's your observation? Like, because you're doing a little bit more urban work these days as opposed to some of that
yes.
rural stuff too, which is a different context. Are you finding that in that urban space that the ESG is getting adopted, that has shifted things to more focus on the S and ESG, or do you think that is still a lot of work to do? What's your observations?
Yeah, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, what I'm hoping, or I guess where I perhaps see some good opportunity to really demonstrate the value of the S in ESG is obviously with the 2032 Olympics upcoming and all of
Likewise.
these conversations about legacy and what that means for communities following the games. So I think there's an increasing focus on it. But there's still a little ways to go in terms of the S, the E, and the G are a little
I
bit.
think, yeah, I agree. And I agree wholeheartedly with the Olympics. I think the legacy piece is something that social impact um, professionals and expertise has a huge role to play in the legacy
Yeah.
piece for the Olympics. Because I think I don't know if you saw the episode, but Marcus Curcia was on and he said it beautifully. He said, "We're not planning for the Olympics. We're planning for what's after the Olympics. And in the meantime, we have a really good games, which everyone enjoy. But what we're actually planning for is the decade after the Olympics, that legacy that gets left." And I thought that was a beautiful way to
That's
put it.
fantastic.
And I'm glad that you raised it because I think, in Queensland, it is for the next 10 years, it's going to, you know, in the lead up.
It's going to dominate the discussion.
I think it's going to dominate our conversations. It's going to dominate our planning. It's going to dominate our investments between now and the Olympics. And I would say even immediately after, potentially for some time beyond it, to make sure
Yeah.
those benefits are realised. It doesn't just end at the Olympic Games.
No, no. And I think that's something that's been seen to have happened across so many previous Olympic Games where the games end and then the infrastructure that was built to support those just really don't benefit the community at all and in fact cause challenges and problems for the government in terms of maintenance.
Yeah,
So yeah, there's a real opportunity.
it's an opportunity. And I think the other thing that the social impact space does is, Amanda, is for the Olympics in particular, is really flagging those impacts early. But how do you mitigate those as best
Yeah,
as possible? I think there's a role for us in those kinds of spaces because it's essentially what we do all the time. It's our bread and butter.
absolutely.
It's our bread and butter. Like it's not something we do occasionally or once we get a big project. It's something that we do constantly. We spend our time thinking about it. We're kind of like the social impact nerds,
Yeah.
but it is something that I think that we all want the benefits, of course, but the best way to get the benefits is to make sure people don't fall through the cracks either. And, we've got a housing crisis and we've got an Olympic Games coming on, and that we know that's going to be an influx of people. How do we manage that from a place where the baseline is not particularly fantastic?
Yeah, and that really, starting from that and then thinking about, well, what will that baseline even be in the next 8 years
Yeah.
already? So yeah.
Yeah. So to wrap it up, because I know that you've probably got a day to get on with, let's just close with, if you had one bit of advice for somebody who is early career wanting to get into social impact, what would it be? What would your bit of advice to be for them as they transition from their studies and are seeking a social impact career?
Yeah, I guess my recommendation would be open to working in different sectors, even if you don't necessarily know if your values align with them. So, for example, like I learned an incredible amount working in the extractive space. and came to learn that it's not necessarily everything that I thought it was, and learning about the importance and the role that it plays in so many people's lives and supporting so many communities, but understanding that there are things that can be changed and done to improve those things. So, I would say it's a really good way to be a driving force of change in areas that, you don't necessarily, align with, or you think you don't.
Yeah.
So, just be open to
That
working,
is
in different spaces with different people.
that is I don't think we could have ended it on a more perfect note, Amanda. That is a lovely message. I think it aligns very much with social impact work. Stay open and be in places where you can add value, even if it's a place
Yeah.
you didn't expect to find it. On that note, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us at All Things Social Impact, and I really appreciate you, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to say thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's been wonderful getting to spend time with you.
Thank you. Thank you for watching, and if you're listening, thank you for listening. Remember to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe. When you subscribe to the channel, I get more interesting guests, and we can all learn, grow, and share our stories together. Thank you for listening. Remember, hit the like button, share, subscribe.